Hey, I'm Chris F from Make Everything, and today we're making these steel legs for a bed frame. Check it out. So the backstory with these was actually another YouTuber and Instagrammer named Johnny at JT Woodworks. He asked me if I would be willing to make these and able to make them. I saw it as an interesting challenge for me because I had never really made anything on the milling machine with an angle like this, and I wanted to find a creative way to conceal the welds to preserve these really sharp edges. So it was a fun project. Let's get right into it. Okay, so this project started on my laptop. Johnny had sent me some images through text message that showed the angles and the dimensions, but I always like to just double check the dimensions myself and make sure that I have my own shop drawing to go off. So I sketch them up in Google SketchUp to confirm the angles, make sure everything's going to work, and then I actually print out a page showing each of the two parts that I'm going to be making. Basically, I'm making 8 of the verticals and 4 of the horizontal parts, and the 4 legs are going to be identical. So I wind up going over to the chopping bandsaw and cutting up the material. As far as material here, I'm using 2-inch by 1/2-inch solid cold rolled steel that I ordered from onlinemetals.com. And you can see with all my parts, I'm starting to do my layout. I'm using red Dykem fluid to scribe my lines on based on the dimensions that I have, and then I'll head over to the milling machine. Now this is an older style Bridgeport milling machine, so in order to tilt that head, you have to go into the back and turn basically like a large worm drive gear that turns the head. My machine probably had never been tweaked to 10 plus degrees, so it was a little difficult to get it over, but once I had it set, everything worked out just fine. I'm using a 5/8 4-flute carbide end mill for this, and it really just chews through this cold rolled steel super well and made the entire process really easy. Basically, it was like routing a piece of wood, but it was steel. So for these first parts, I'm going to make both sides of one part of each, and then I'm going to use those as sort of my guide to make the rest. So before I go ahead and potentially ruin all these pieces of material, I'm going to make one set, basically one leg, and then just use my different measuring objects that I have to reference that and make sure that they're all the same size when they're done. Beautiful. So here you can see me just scribing off with the caliper just to get an idea of where I need to use the end mill up until. And I'm not checking the dials. I'm basically just running off of those scribe lines. These things will be accurate enough, and in the end, they turn out to all be the same height within 10 thousandths, which is more than good for a wooden bed frame. So you can see how quickly that carbide end mill really plows through this material and really made quick work of this. So it's important that I have all these pieces, or at least every pair of these pieces, exactly the same height. If they're not exactly the same height, then the leg is not going to be square. So I'm going to use this height gauge, and I'm going to basically just index off of the first part that I made, get that exact height right on the corner. I'm going to utilize this thing to get as precise of a measurement as I can, lock it all in, and now I'll take the other one that I just milled, this one that I just milled, which needs the back side of it milled, and by using the same setup I can scribe it in. Now this thing is a precision ground angle plate, so I know that that's 90 degrees to the table, and I can basically just scribe that in. I just need to hold it. So that's where I have to mill to. So back over on the milling machine, I can
just continue to use my same setup. I'm using the same parallels every time and just running through and getting these cuts in the material, going to my scribe lines, being very careful not to take off too much material, and just watching things as I go. You can see how close those parts came to each other, and then I can do my first little test assembly here and just make sure that everything's looking good, and then use these pieces as my reference to mark out the rest.
All right, so all the single sides are milled. I went ahead and I milled a 10-degree bevel into one side of each of these pieces of metal, and that is because one side, it's not referencing off anything, so I can mill in one side perfect, and then I can indicate off of the one finished part that I'm using as basically a sample, and I can now use that finished part to mark the other side. So basically for this, these pieces, the way these angles sit, I can back this up against this angle plate like a stop and then use a knife to scribe that in, and that's going to make it so that when I mill this angle, these pieces are going to be exactly the same. Now, the precision on these is relative to each other. They don't need to be precise based on the drawing. They just need to be precise based on each other. Obviously, these are the legs of a piece of furniture, so I don't want one of them to be longer or shorter than the other, because then the thing would wobble and someone would definitely die. And if you're following along here, the key is to not die. That's what we're going for. So, and then on this piece, these pieces, like I did before with the indicator, I basically just back these up against this angle plate and then use the indicator to scribe in a line. And by scribing in this line, using the height gauge gives me a perfect reference, and I know that everything is going to line up right. So now I can go back to the milling machine and finish milling the second side of all these parts, and then everything should be exactly the same. Okay, so I've got all my pieces cut, everything is milled, good to go. Now, the way that I want to assemble these, I actually want to preserve these crisp edges that I'm getting. So in order to do that, I'm going to just weld these on the bottom. I'm going to grind in a little area on the bottom of both of these, chamfer them, clamp them tight, and just weld them in there so that you get this really nice look of a straight edge there, so they look like they're not even welded. They almost look like they're just stuck together. I think it'll be a nice detail, so let's get to grinding all these. It's extremely important that I don't grind the wrong side of any of these, because I will ruin the parts. So I'm going to mark them. As I go, because I don't want to rush and make a mistake. And then we're going to use our trusty quick vise to hold these while I grind them with the angle grinder.
So like I said, it's really important that I don't hit the corners, so I'm just getting in there right with the corner of my disc and making sure that I make out a little trough, just enough for me to get a weld in there, and the weld is going to be plenty strong.
So you can see the voids that I've now made that I'm going to be able to go in and fill in with the welder to get these bonded but leave this nice crisp edge.
So once I had all the pieces ground up, back over at the welding table, I set up a little backstop using this C-channel, and it just gave me somewhere to clamp the pieces to, because my concern is that these are going to warp.
So by adding these little blocks, these are the same angle, and having them press up against there Gets this all nice and tight. Now this setup really has nowhere to go, and I can weld this from the back side.
The concern when you're welding something like this, especially with a already splayed out angle, is that heat is going to cause warping. So getting everything really nice and tight and clamped down well is definitely going to help with that. In this case, having that clamp across the bottom with those angled pieces and that welding clamp hitting the C-channel, it made it so that these things did not move at all despite all the heat I put on them. And I really wanted to make sure that I burned in a good weld into those troughs because I want these legs to be really strong even though they're not fully welded on all four sides of the joint. Little things like the clamping and making sure that you have enough heat coming out of your MIG gun can really help get a strong joint in something like this. So you want to make sure if you're ever going to do a project like this, you have a proper way to hold the material together so that you don't warp it with your heat. Once I had those welded up, I was able to go back over to the grinder and just grind away the bottoms of those welds so they would sit nice and flat. And again, I'm watching my corners, making sure everything stays nice and flat and square on those corners, which is the whole point. And it's really just kind of touching it up with the edge of that cutting disc. That's a Benchmark Abrasives zirconium disc, a 40 grit. Very good for this kind of removal.
All right, just in case you're wondering if these are strong because they're only welded in those two small spots, we're gonna test it. 170 pounds. Seems good enough to me.
So now that I have them ground out on the bottoms, I can start working on the tops. And these are just going to be a piece of 1/8 inch plate, and I'm sort of cutting each one to length, and then I'm going to weld them to the top and grind them flat.
Scotch-Brite pad from Benchmark Abrasives on a soft back. Perfect for cleaning up mill scale.
I pull a little bit of the mill scale off of these. I don't grind them out too crazy because they're not going to be seen. They're going to be on the top of the leg. I just wanted to make sure that they weren't dirty. And I just mark them out with a Sharpie where they're all going to be drilled. Johnny had given me a hole pattern, and then the additional holes that I drilled are going to be 2 holes that go over the verticals of the legs and then are countersunk from the top so that I can plug weld them down to the tops of those verticals on the legs, and it'll keep everything super tight, and these things will not go anywhere. Once I get everything drilled, I head over to the sander and just kind of like deburr everything, clean everything up. I don't want any sharp edges on this, aside from where I do want sharp edges, but I don't want any burrs to catch on anybody or fabric bedding or anything like that. Again, getting back over here with some good clamping, and I'm just plug welding in those holes that I drilled and countersunk from the top side so that there would be plenty of material bonded on the tops of these legs. And you'll notice that I left the top plates a little bit long on both sides, and that was my intention. Instead of trying to get them precise and square, I would just go back over and grind everything in when I was done. So I go back over here, and you can see I'm very, very gently just kind of hitting that edge, just making sure that everything squares up super nice, hitting any edges that seem to, have any sort of defect, and just trying to blend everything, but also keep it square and really, really clean. Once I was done with all my grinding, there was still a good amount of the red Dykem on there, so I used some Dykem remover, a Scotch-Brite, and some acetone to just get rid of everything. It's important to clean your parts, especially if you're going to use layout fluid, and the actual Dykem remover that they sell in the spray I found works really, really well. It helps get everything clean, and all in all, this project came out nice. These legs look super nice, and I'm looking forward to see Johnny putting them in place on the final product.
All right, that about does it for this one. Thanks so much for watching. These were a great little project. I love, sort of exploring different processes and how to do things and kind of figuring things out in my own way. And then when they work, it's a great feeling. Thanks so much for following along. If you have any questions, leave them down below. Follow me on Instagram at MakeEverythingShop if you want to see behind the scenes footage from when I do a project like this. I usually post something on my story, or I'll do a live video kind of showing my thought process while I'm going through it. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check it out. If you enjoyed the video, like it, share it with friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. That's about it. Hope to see you on the next one. Thanks.